My name is Martin Scanlan. I am the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Professional Capital and Community, and we're pleased to welcome three of our board members here for a special video recording to launch our Professionalism in the Pandemic special issue. I work at Boston College in the United States of America.
Hello, everybody. I'm Pak Tee Ng from Singapore. I work at the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, and that, of course, is in Singapore.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Alma Harris, and I'm based at the University of Swansea in Wales, UK.
Hello, this is Pasi Sahlberg from Sydney, Australia. I work at the University of New South Wales here.
Thanks, Pak Tee, Alma, and Pasi for being here. I want to start us off by a question about professionalism. So at this particular time in history, as citizens all around the world are coping with the many disruptions that the COVID-19 pandemic is causing communities, how is this concept of professionalism, particularly in education, changing? Or put differently, should we as educators change how we think about professionalism in light of the pandemic?
To me, professionalism should not change in its meaning and nature. Professionalism means you have the knowledge, skills, and attitude of the profession, and you're committed to the mission of the profession. So now, even during a pandemic, the mission of education has not changed. It is always to enlighten, to inspire, to edify, to care. Now that has not changed, but the way to do it will have to change. So what does exercising professionalism during a pandemic look like? So first, teachers will have to learn very quickly to teach in an online environment that is professional first. Secondly, teachers will have to find better ways to educate and not just simply replicate lessons in a virtual medium. And we have to look out for disadvantaged students, alert school to their situation, see whether help for them could be found. And very importantly, we should continue as good teaching professionals to have that joy in teaching, even if it is now online. Because how can we expect learners, our students, to have joy in learning if we do not have joy in teaching, albeit in a very difficult situation? There is also another concept called collective professionalism. It's not just about the individual, but collective as a profession. So collective professionalism means something like that as a collective, we share resources and help one another face challenges in teaching in an online environment. And different educators play different roles in the system: classroom teachers, department heads, school leaders, headquarter officers. Professionalism, collective professionalism, also means that we trust one another, that we are all working together to solve problems, albeit at different levels and different parts of the system. And when we as teachers all show that sort of commitment and care, then our collective professionalism gives the society confidence in teachers and schools. So that's my view.
Thanks, Pak Tee. Alma or Pasi, any responses to Pak Tee's assertion about professionalism and it not changing, but the exercise of it changing, or the collective professionalism?
Yeah, if I can join, I think I agree with what Pak Tee was nicely speaking about this professionalism. But, this pandemic and all these unexpected things that it has brought to schools have also put schools and teachers in a way to the test in terms of their professionalism. And it's interesting to see already now around the world how the school systems have reacted differently at the level of the school and the teacher in adapting to the online teaching and remote learning mode. In some places, the teachers were basically just told what to do, which is not much of a sign of a professionalism if you just follow the orders, what your superiors ask you to do. And in some other places, schools and teachers were basically asked to figure out the best way to make sure that the learning continues and that the kids are safe and learning. And if we compare these two different environments, and they basically happens to be those that one I know that they better than anything else here in Australia and Finland. I think it's easy to understand that in the system where teachers are actually asked to figure out what to do within the framework, of course, they can exercise this professionalism that Pak Tee was talking about much better than in the system where they basically keep on following directives and orders as before.
Thanks, Pasi. Let's push the conversation beyond this to leadership itself and thinking about vis-a-vis leadership. In your perspective, is the pandemic challenging or disrupting or transforming educational leadership in schools or in school systems?
Well, if I can respond to that, I mean, the short answer is yes. I think that leadership has experienced a pandemic paradigm shift, and it probably won't return to where it was in terms of the practices, the norms, the expectations of leaders. Now, that doesn't mean that the DNA of leadership has changed. It's still about relationship building, capacity building, trust. It's all those things. Just like professionalism, the standards haven't changed. But what has changed is the practice of leadership. In a pandemic, you can't rely on the old models of leadership to dictate how you should behave, because schools are no longer operating the way they were. So leaders are no longer operating the way they were. So I think where that takes us is to a form of leadership that is really blended. We talk about blended learning, but I think we've got blended leadership now. We've also got distributed leadership, because essentially you are leading individuals online. You're not seeing them face to face. So it requires a different sort of leadership skill, a different set of practices, a different set of norms, really. And I guess my own view is I'm not 100% sure that we can go back or that we should go back. I think the leadership that we have is, as Pak Tee has rightfully said, is collaborative, it's creative, and in fact it's community-based as well. We're seeing a lot of agency coming from community organizations. So I think that leadership itself hasn't changed, but the context has changed dramatically, and we know what that does to leadership practices. But I think what I'm heartened by is that 10 weeks or 11 weeks on, we're seeing schools still functioning remotely. We're seeing young people still learning. We're seeing leaders of schools engaging with their staff, albeit in a different way. And we're seeing new leadership practices, which quite frankly are probably better than the ones we saw before. I don't think we've got the theory to follow the practice just yet, but I think the practice itself is both illuminating and insightful and in many ways innovative. And that's what we need from our leaders right now at all levels in the system. We need innovation, we need inspiration, and ultimately we also need care, which includes self-care. So leadership has dramatically altered, in my view, as a result of this pandemic. And I think we're going to see many more forms of leadership practice emerging for the better.
It's interesting, Alma, that you bring up the practice changing, which parallels what Pak Tee was saying about the exercise of professionalism changing. Pasi and Pak Tee, any responses to Alma's assertions about leadership?
Yeah, let me react quickly before Pak Tee says anything else. I think again, if we look at the education system where the overall kind of a leadership or management culture, if you wish, is based much more on school leaders following the regulations and orders, as it is in many places here in Australia. I think what I've seen here is that many school principals actually have lost big part of their leadership, because when the pandemic really hit hard the schools, and the schools were ordered to close their gates. Many principals here, they were just basically waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, and it kind of reflects also the culture of the the governance of the system. Whereas, again, in some other places, like I mentioned Finland earlier, when something like this happened, when the crisis kind of emergency hit the system, the school leaders actually took the leadership, and they started to act and react and respond to this crisis without waiting for orders there. So again, I think it really depends on what type of culture of leadership and management the country and the system happens to have in terms of what happens and what type of leadership we've seen. But Pak Tee, what is your take on this?
I agree with what Alma is saying, in that the nature of leadership perhaps is not changed, but the exercise of leadership will have to change during the pandemic. So pandemic or otherwise, educators are people who plant trees so that some other people sit under those trees, and perhaps no one will ever know who planted those trees in the first place. And leaders are teachers who gather other teachers to plant those trees together. But during a pandemic, I think higher levels of leadership is required, because leaders will have to remind people in a very difficult situation of their unchanging mission to motivate people to solve problems and to empower people to solve problems together. So in my mind, higher levels of leadership is actually required.
So let's push the conversation one step further then. What lies ahead? Should we anticipate a new normal, or will return to school be business as usual in the coming year, assuming that a vaccine is created? What lies ahead?
Yes, Martin, if I take the first call with this one, I think first of all, we need to keep in mind that anything like this hasn't happened before. So nobody really knows how this all will play out, what's going to happen to the pandemic, and how the schools and the learning systems will react to this. So basically the thing we can do is exactly what we are doing now in this conversation, is to kind of guess or try to use our professional wisdom and try to predict what's going to happen. So let me mention a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 things that I can see within this question that you asked. I think my first notion is that there has been a huge amount of high hopes and expectations, kind of a positive spirit during these last few months about that the schools will finally change, and people speak about reimagining schools and the new normal and you name it. Now the interesting notion is that there's much more of this type of activity and action at the grassroots level. I mean, schools and teachers and school leaders, individuals are very actively now looking for kind of a new way to move forward. Then there's a little bit less of that action when we move a little higher in the education pyramid, in the middle level, the districts or clusters of schools. But there's still kind of expectations that now we can finally go to the next level and really see the change. Interestingly, I have seen much less this type of excitement at the top level of education pyramid. In other words, in the administration of ministries and other places. Probably they have been too busy kind of managing this crisis and trying to figure out what to do. But this said, if this is a correct observation, that if this continues to be like this, then probably we are not going to see this change, if there's going to be any change, coming through the policy-driven initiatives. The change will probably come, if it happens, through the grassroots, through these active individuals and mavericks who will lead the change. Then the other one is that your question about whether there will be return to business as usual or new normal. I've been kind of surprised to see how many questions there have been in media and by parents and some education authorities about how much children have lost something important, some learning in mathematics or literacy or something else. And, this indicates to me that we, if these questions continue, we're certainly going to go back to business as usual. Much more interesting and important question would be that what these children did learn when they were locked into their houses and were not able to come to school? What did they learn about life? What did they learn about this pandemic and the virus? Or what did they learn when they spent more time with their parents and siblings and hopefully played more and learned to play a musical instrument or do something in the kitchen? I think these questions should be something that we ask far before we should be concerned about how much kids have lost something. And, if we continue asking these questions of loss, then of course it's much more likely that we're going to return back to the business as usual, or rather than creating something new. And finally, I think the important point here is that has been much less discussed here is that, and this is a fact, this is the only thing we know for sure, and it is that all the governments in the world, when this mess is over, I don't know how long it's going to take, it doesn't matter, but all the governments will be, they find themselves between a rock and a hard place, meaning that their budgets are blown away, and their debt up to their eyeballs, which means that they have to find savings and cut budgets wherever they can. They cannot do that in health because of the obvious reasons. So what is left there in the national budgets is education. So I think what we're going to see around the world within the next 5 to 10 years is the reduced budgets. There's much less resources and money available. There will be much less teachers in these systems in many countries. And it's very hard to believe, unless we are really bold and smart, that anything radically new could come in this type of fiscal conditions that many countries will find themselves. I hope that I'm wrong with this one. And if I am, I'm very happy to admit and apologize. But I spent too many years working in the education administration, and I know how difficult things are when the reality hits through the reduced budgets.
Thanks, Pasi. Responses, Alma and Pak Tee, to Pasi's assertions about the return to the new normal or not so much, and the budgetary constraints and some of the different concerns there. Alma, go ahead.
One of the things that I've noticed in the various sort of articles that have been written about the pandemic is that they're very polarized. On one hand, it's return to normal ASAP, and on the other hand, this extreme of reimagining what education could be like. And I think the reality is probably somewhere in the middle. And I take on board what Pasi said about some of the threats, I guess, some of the real issues around finance. And I guess that takes me back to leadership. And in a sense, what we have is imperfect leadership right now, because Pasi's right, we just don't know. And I guess one of the things to think about is it will be imperfect. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it doesn't mean it's right, but it will be imperfect as we move forward, because there is no blueprint. And I was struck by a comment that a colleague made throughout this crisis, that normal is actually a setting on a washing machine. That, in a sense, why would you want to return to normal, even if you knew what that was? I think that if we look at education, if we look back, and that's not always a bad thing, but if we look back, our education systems, our schooling systems were fraught with accountability, measurement, standards, and maybe we've not lost anything terribly much in losing those. PISA, for example, right now, I don't think any government's preoccupied with PISA. It's preoccupied with the well-being of young people and their learning. 1.6 billion young people out of school. That doesn't mean they've been out of learning. That doesn't mean that they haven't been productive in accessing all sorts of materials, all sorts of experiences. So I don't think we should see it as a loss. I just think it's a different phase. And that's where I guess I would be more positive that this different phase could lead to something better. The challenges of equity, the challenges of inequality are still there, riddled in the old system. And maybe moving forward, we could find new ways of actually challenging those things and putting systems into a much better place. That doesn't mean it's not fraught. That doesn't mean it's not difficult. That doesn't mean it's not unpredictable. But I guess I have a glimmer of optimism that as we move forward, we can really begin to tackle some of the things that we thought were insurmountable. But look what we've achieved in the last 10 or 11 weeks. You know, we've managed to get young people and families through. I'm also optimistic, I suppose, about the community dimension of this and the way in which communities have responded throughout this crisis. And we shouldn't forget the importance of home as part of education. And I think strengthening those community links would be a really, really positive way of moving forward.
Thanks so much, Alma. Pak Tee, how about you?
Okay, I think a lot of people have been speaking about this idea of the new normal. So instead of looking for change, perhaps I approach it from another perspective. So to me, in a world kind of where change is the only constant, perhaps one real change is to look for constants that should not change. And to me, as a Singaporean, our education system has always worked on this fundamental philosophy that education is investment, not expenditure. And I hope that this will continue to be that evergreen constant, that even with our economy badly hit because of the pandemic, that we'll continue to see the importance and to invest in teachers, the professionalism of educators, and always to look after the well-being of our students. And the other thing is perhaps about this idea of online learning. For me, it's not so much about online learning, it's about blended learning. But blended learning has always been there as a concept. I just hope that after the pandemic, of course, teachers are now much more familiar with these online tools. But I hope that the movement will not be just simply towards online learning, because tools, to me, that's not the point. Pedagogy is the point. Why Zoom when you can see the students face to face? Why play online games when children could play in the school playground? So I hope that after the pandemic, that if at all, that educators can use this opportunity to use technology powerfully to enhance learning. But the point is not to use technology for the sake of technology. The point is to use technology so that we can really enhance pedagogy, make learning interesting, make learning come alive.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Martin, can I add something to this?
Please.
Can I add something to what Pak Tee was saying? Because I agree that technology should be used as a blended learning and meaningful pedagogical model. But we have to keep in mind that according to the latest OECD data, only 2 of 3 schools in the OECD on average have teachers or facilities to do that, to integrate technology in a meaningful ways into teaching. So it means that there's a huge number of teachers and schools and millions of children who don't have this luxury to do that. And then, of course, the question is, this is part of this professionalism question that we started earlier. The question is that what are we going to do about this? That is the next step then to massively prepare and train all the teachers and schools to be able to do something like this? Or should the solution, if something like this happens again, be something different that would not be dependent on the digital platforms and the technology that is or doesn't exist in the schools?
And you get to the point of the students not having it, families not having it. But another related point is the teachers and the administrators and their capacities to use it. So that also varies tremendously across the profession. And some who are very used to and adept with using online technologies and different communication, and many that find themselves without that. I want to give you any final remarks you'd like to make that you haven't been able to make when thinking about these questions about professionalism in the pandemic.
So
go ahead, Pak Tee.
what Pasi has said is the pandemic has thrown this picture into sharp relief. There is a gap between those who are kind of well equipped to be based at home to do online learning and those who are not well equipped to do so. So I think part of the solution or part of what we need to do is precisely to study this. And if we really want to do blended learning much better, we actually have to look into that digital gap, that divide between the have and have-nots. And I think it's quite crucial for us to do so. And I think it is quite professional of us to study this issue and to make sure that if we are going more and more in that direction, that no children will be disadvantaged simply because they do not have the means to do it.
I guess my final reflection is that in terms of professional capital, I think connectivity is the new professional capital, is the new social capital, is the new decisional capital. Because without it, in this current situation, we couldn't build community, we couldn't build collaboration. So I take on board exactly what Pasi and Pak Tee have been saying about the danger of the digital divide actually becoming exacerbated by this pandemic, and the haves and have-nots become the educational haves and have-nots. But I think looking forward, if governments were going to put their resources anywhere, it must be around connectivity, online support, and just getting schools into the 21st century, not forgetting about buildings, I suppose, but thinking more about the process of learning, because schooling isn't learning. Schooling is the place that you go to learn, or you did go to learn. That's radically altered in this new world of ours.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alma. Pasi, go ahead.
Can I add something? Yeah, can I add something in the end? I think one thing, one positive thing that might come out of this this pandemic and the virus mess that we are now, if the governments or the systems take it seriously and prepare themselves better for the next time, because something like this may happen again. It may be the virus, or maybe some other thing, and if they look carefully what has happened now and how the different education systems and cultures have responded to this crisis, then probably people would realize that the kind of a best way, the smartest way to get over this and respond to this crisis is when we allow our schools and teachers freedom to decide what is the best thing to do. And this would be a kind of a springboard for the culture where we are beginning to trust more school principals and teachers as professionals in their judgment, not only in the crisis situation and how they respond to this, but in any normal situation where good decisions have to be made. And for me, for example, this has been one of the interesting lessons has been to look at the different education systems, how they have behaved very differently in this respect, how the response is organized, if we have a system, if we have more systems where the schools and principals and teachers would have more authority and freedom and responsibility to react to bad things and good things, I think it would be a very good step forward.
That's a great way to sum things up. Thank you. I'm not sure we'll keep this on the video or not, but what you're all saying reminds me of fractals. The principle of fractals, where the small is captured in the large. When I was 30 years ago, when I was a teacher in a fourth grade classroom, my mentor teacher had on the board in the front of the room for all the fourth graders to read, "My education is my responsibility." And he wanted the students to get from the start, from this young age, these youngsters, this notion that they were responsible for their own learning. And that was a very progressive way of looking at it. And what I hear across a number of, I've been taking notes, and this tension between being told what to do and giving independence, and the agency within the distributed leadership that was coming out, and this kind of collective, I see that happening almost at all levels, from the student level to the teacher level to the principal level to the system level. I hear that in your remarks, this agency in the learning, whether that decision making is with this child or whether that decision making is with the teacher in the classroom or with the principal. So for what it's worth, I hear that across all of your remarks. So go ahead, Pak Tee.
Can I make a remark? It just occurred to me that one keyword is adaptability. That is to say, right now we have a problem called COVID-19. It's a virus. So adaptability, or rather two keywords, adaptability and be very balanced in our approach to change. Be very balanced and careful in our approach to change. So COVID-19 is a virus. It strikes, and then we do a knee-jerk reaction, let's say, and move everything online. The next time we might be hit by a computer virus. And after that, we don't know what to do because everything has moved online. So I'm saying that today it could be a physical virus, tomorrow it could be a computer virus. Therefore, more importantly, I think as a profession, we have to be very adaptable, and we have to think very carefully about our path of change, so that it's not just simply a knee-jerk reaction, but a very carefully deliberated, reflective way of looking at where education ought to go for the future.